Okay, can everybody see the screen in the presentation? I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So for
Yes.
those of you who were at the last, who are members of the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee, I apologize. This will be repetitive. This is our first public meeting for public participants and stakeholders to introduce them to the planning process and to kind of talk about where we're at and ask or solicit ways for them to be involved. So I'll jump right in the agenda for the evening. By the way, I'm Scott Choquette. I'm with Dewberry Engineers. We're a consulting firm that's helping the county bring us all through this planning process, and I'm the project manager for the job. Tonight we'll talk a little bit about why we're doing this, what sort of the key pieces are, what makes this different from the last plan update, and what the next steps are and how you can help us and be involved. So a little bit by way of background, this is a hazard mitigation plan, and what hazard mitigation is actions that we take to reduce or eliminate damages or injuries from future disasters. We're focused primarily on natural disasters, with some exceptions for the college campuses. And those damages could be physical damages or expenses associated with responding to keep critical community functions operating. So think about long-term sustainable things that you can do to prevent damages from a disaster. So things like building defensible space around buildings, or retrofitting a piece of infrastructure or a building from flooding or earthquakes or whatever the hazard may be. Those things are hazard mitigation because you do them today to prevent damage in the future. Things like preparedness and response and all that, some of that creeps its way into the plan, but it is not the primary focus. The primary focus is on adaptation and mitigation, and we'll talk about that more as we go through. So think of it as the phases of emergency management are mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, and this is primarily focused on mitigation. So why do we go through this planning process? Really, it's to reduce or eliminate the need to respond, to lessen the burden on resources, to protect people and property and infrastructure from the damages we see from events like flooding or winter weather events or severe storms. We link it to other initiatives within the county and its communities that relate to resiliency and sustainability. There's a lot of data sharing that happens between the state and the county and the communities. The state also has a plan, and these county and community plans kind of provide more granular information to inform and continuously improve the state plan. And most importantly, it supports decision making, and we'll talk a little bit about how it does that. The requirement came about with the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. So this is, I believe, the fourth update of the Frederick County plan, and that the act requires that a plan be developed that meets certain standards and that it be updated every 5 years. And we'll talk about what that update means and what we're doing differently this time around. And in order to be eligible for certain hazard mitigation assistance grants and other money to do the actual work in the projects to reduce the damage and do the mitigation, you have to have this approved plan that follows this process that we're following. Those programs, I won't go into detail on all of them, but there's basically 4 of them in the FEMA arena. There's 4 of them. The Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities is an annual grant program. It's new. It happens to have a lot of money involved in it this year, and it appears that it will be, at least for the immediate future. It will have for at least the immediate future. And as the name implies, it focuses on infrastructure, community lifelines, social vulnerability, green infrastructure, things that larger projects that make communities more resilient to hazards. The 2 HMGPs, that's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That program is available after disasters, and it looks at the total cost of the federal cost of the disaster recovery, and it makes 15 plus% of that amount available for hazard mitigation projects. So this COVID, for example, is a presidentially declared disaster. And just recently, they've decided to add a hazard mitigation grant program component to that disaster. So 15% of the money that Maryland has incurred in damages from the COVID-19 will be available for things like flood mitigation or other hazard mitigation. And the FMA, lastly, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, it is a program specifically targeted at properties that are insured by the national or insurable by the National Flood Insurance Program. So it really focuses on things like home acquisitions or elevations or small drainage projects that protect properties insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. Those are the FEMA programs that require this plan update. I emphasize not to focus only on projects and things that are eligible for those programs, because there's a lot of different resources out there, a lot of different sources of assistance. So this plan should be wider than just the narrow FEMA programs and focus on all opportunities to get money to adapt to climate adaptation or to do mitigation projects. So we're these programs are the driver, but there's a lot of other sources of money out there. Plan update requirements. Every time you update the plan, there's a comprehensive planning process that you have to follow, and you have to demonstrate that that process was followed by documenting who was involved in preparing the update, what their involvement was, how the plan will be monitored, maintained, and continue to have involvement as it's implemented in the future. So there's a large stakeholder and public input component to the plan. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we're doing to meet that requirement, not the least of which is tonight's meeting and some future meetings that we'll have. Another main component is the hazard identification and risk assessment has to be updated each and every time there's a plan update. Includes profiles of hazards, vulnerability assessment, loss estimations, and changes in development. So we're not only looking at protecting what exists currently, but we're also looking at making sure that things aren't constructed in harm's way or in such a manner that we're creating more risk and vulnerability going forward. So those are the things more related to policy and planning and regulations and things like that. And then once the hazard mitigate or the hazard ID and risk assessment is updated, that data is used to focus on a new mitigation strategy or a refreshed mitigation strategy for deciding what actions you want to take going forward. So essentially, the risk assessment is the homework that you do before you make the investment, and the investment is the mitigation strategy, hopefully aided by some of those grant programs. And then lastly, looking at capabilities, we look at regulatory, fiscal, technical, other capabilities, that things that the county and its municipalities and the colleges who are and universities who are involved are doing currently, how they can navigate through these programs, and if we identify gaps in any of those capabilities and how those gaps can be filled in the form of a mitigation strategy. And then lastly, there's an approval process that the plan has to go through, where it first goes through the Maryland Emergency Management Agency and then FEMA Region 3 for their feedback before it gets finalized and approved. Again, the major components, I think I just covered most of these. Just kind of the check marks show where we're at. The planning process description is an ongoing piece that is well underway and will be finished when we have the first draft of the plan. The capability assessment is completed. The risk assessment, including a vulnerability assessment and loss estimation, is also completed. And then the next steps we'll be working on is circling back with all the municipalities in the county and the colleges to develop hazard mitigation strategies. and then developing an implementation plan. This is a general timeline of project milestones. So to look at it, it seems like you see workshop one, we're not that far in, but actually we're more than 3/4 of the way in. All the heavy lifting really is in the risk assessment and the capability assessment. So um, following this meeting, that piece of the plan will be available for public review, and then we'll move into the mitigation strategy development section with the municipalities, and we'll reconvene a workshop there's a full countywide hazard mitigation planning team, and then for each of the participating jurisdictions or campuses, there's a local planning team. So we'll be reconvening them to work on that development of the strategies, and then we'll come back and have a third workshop, and these are milestone workshops, and another public meeting where we'll present the draft of the plan. So we are all these other steps from where we are now will accelerate. The idea or the plan is to have a completed draft of the plan available in December for public and stakeholder review that will go on into the review process somewhere toward the middle or 3/4 of the way through December. So this is the flavor of where we're at. I mentioned public outreach is a required component, so we appreciate your participation tonight. We're doing a variety of things. Back in the day, we used to just do a couple of public meetings and hope for a good turnout, and that doesn't work in this day and age. As you can see by the fact that we have only 6 attendees tonight. So we've tried a variety of different techniques. There is a project website that can be found on the County Emergency Management website. And on that site, there's a link to a survey which has closed, but we're happy to forward that to you if you email us and ask for it. There's also what's called a story map. There's a link to a story map where you can go on, see a map of the county, zoom in on your area or location, drop a pin on a specific location, and give us information about a particular issue, whether it's a drainage flooding issue or a landslide issue. You can essentially just drop that pin and have a text box and be able to explain to us that there's an issue there, and that'll get incorporated into the vulnerability assessment. All these meetings, you see this one is being recorded tonight. The videos of the meetings are posted on YouTube channels and other different locations. Once the plan is drafted, we will be doing some targeted outreach to other neighboring communities and stakeholders, asking them to review specific portions of the plan. So all of this is underway and is necessary. We've had extremely good success with the online survey for this particular plan. I think we're over 600 responses, I want to say, and somewhere in the 640 range, which is amazing considering another plan we're currently involved in, not too far away in Virginia, had a response of about 11 people to the survey. And quite frankly, we advertised it more widely than this one was. So great response to the survey. A lot of good input, a lot of good write-in input. So we're making really good progress with the input portion. Some things that are changing with this plan. The 2016 plan was the Frederick County Hazard Mitigation Plan. In 2021, we're moving towards the Frederick County Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan. We followed a model. There's several models where other people are starting to do this, but Massachusetts was kind of the pioneer for it with their state plan, where in addition to the typical hazard assessment and loss estimation and mitigation strategies, they looked at climate projections. They arranged their hazards in the plan by the types of climate change that are impacting those specific hazards. And then they added adaptation strategies in addition to hazard mitigation projects and actions, which are very, very similar things. They're just based on different projections and sometimes different timeframes or longer term timeframes. So we're going to be following that model, or we are following that model. So for this update, we've looked at climate change projections for Maryland and the region. We've arranged the hazard taxonomy to interact with the different types of impacts that climate change is having, such as changes in precipitation, temperature extremes, more extreme weather events, and then the non-climate influence hazards such as earthquake, for example. So think about these high intensity rainfall events that have been seem to be increasing in frequency lately, that have changed the picture of flooding from the traditional out of the bank riverine flooding that FEMA models to more overwhelmed drainage systems and things like that. So it's kind of those changes in the hazards are being incorporated into this round of planning. I think I've covered most of the other pieces of this. We're also going to be integrating, or are integrating, with the recommended actions from the Frederick Climate Emergency Mobilization Work Group, their Climate Response and Resilience Plan. We're also looking at social vulnerability. This is it's a very big trend in all the funding programs across state and federal agencies where equity and social vulnerability are being considered. We haven't done that in any meaningful way in previous plan updates, and this one is going to look at the CDC's social vulnerability index and look at and kind of overlay. They do this by census block, and they look at the categories that you see on the right hand side of the screen, and they kind of rank by census block, which is much smaller than county or community level, these different types of vulnerabilities. So we'll take that and overlay it with the hazard areas that lend themselves to spatial analysis, and we'll kind of look at the intersection of where the hazards are increasing and where the most vulnerable populations are, to give us a more complete picture of the risk, or at least add another component of it. And a lot of these grant applications now, in the last couple of years, require you to do that, particularly with the BRIC program. So we'll use that vulnerability index to intersect with flood hazards, dam inundation zones, wild and urban interface. As I said, the ones that kind of lend themselves to spatial analysis, to see where the highest hazards are and the highest vulnerable populations are. Also, we're bumping up the robustness of the future development. It's a requirement that you consider that, but Frederick County has a livable Frederick master plan and initiative. So we're doing a lot of integration with that, where we're looking at the data from that plan that dovetails really nicely with this one. And we're looking at things like proposed community facilities, changes in transportation, growth areas, and how they interplay with the hazard data, again to look at the future, to make sure that as we strive to develop in an intelligent way, we're not developing in a way that creates more vulnerability. And we'll have some maps in there about future growth areas, where we'll show hazard areas related to growth areas and proposed new facilities, etc. So those are sort of some of the enhancements that we're making this go around. The hazard ID and risk assessment, this alone could be a 2-hour presentation, so we're giving an abbreviated version tonight. We're only touching on a couple of the higher hazards, but the components of this risk assessment are ranking the hazards. So you're supposed to look at every natural hazard that could impact the county or the participating jurisdictions and rank it kind of a level of priority analysis. You do a profile where you update the history of events, any new development, things that have changed to change that particular hazard. You look at climate change impacts, location, extent, and occurrences, updating the history. and then updating the loss estimations and vulnerability as data gets better. All the loss estimation is based on best available data. So presumably each time you update the plan, that data gets a little bit better, and it has kind of significantly this time for some of the hazards. Look at probability of future events, potential impacts, and then lastly, how does it integrate with and line up with the Maryland State Hazard Mitigation Plan. These are the hazards that are considered in the main countywide plan and in the jurisdictional plan. The campuses, because they're unique and smaller, focus on some different hazards, which include some man-made hazards. But primarily for the county plan, the hazards you see on the screen are the hazards that were considered and addressed in the update. Again, changes to the HIRA. We updated the ranking. I mentioned the social vulnerability, future development. One thing that we did that was really brand new. I think, I don't know this for sure, but I think it's the first plan in Maryland, and one of the first plans in the nation that looks at pluvial flood modeling. And what pluvial means is the high intensity rainfall event, drainage, flash flooding that seems to be occurring and causing damage much more frequently lately. I have a couple of slides on that a bit further on, but it was a pretty significant investment that the county made into doing this analysis, and it's quite unique to this plan. So it's pretty cool thing to tout, and we hope it'll benefit the actions that we develop. Climate adaptation focus, and then the different types of analysis that we'll talk about in a minute. And we also included more mapping in the plan this time than in previous plans. So the hazard ranking, I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but it's based on the things across the top. The probability being the highest weighted factor, the vulnerability, how much of the area, the geographic area is affected, the warning time, and some other things. You can see how they're all kind of put into ranges. And we use this to go through the hazards and rank them. And the ranking is not to determine whether or not they belong in the plan necessarily. It's more to justify why, for example, we spend more time in the analysis for flooding or severe winter weather than we do on the analysis for karst or land subsidence, just because in general they're problems that we need to address more urgently than some of the others. So this table, you can see the 2016 ranking, the updated 2021 ranking. Largely they rank the same. Tornado, severe weather, bumped up from medium to medium high, primarily just because of the increase in these high intensity storm events that we're seeing. I believe everything else ranked exactly the same as it did in 2016. Some of the sources of data, we looked to FEMA for federally declared disasters, disaster history. You've got to predict probability, and you predict probability primarily by looking at history. So we got to take the best available data that's available historically to look at what may be happening into the future. So FEMA has a database of disasters and payouts and claims. And then NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has a database of, I emphasize the word reported damages for all different types of events. It's primarily collected at the county level and not as granular at the local level, but it talks about the areas impacted, damages, and describes the events. So for some of the lesser hazards that we can't model with different technologies, we rely a lot on the NOAA NCEI storm database. Since the last plan update in 2016, there's been 3 presidentially declared disasters, 1 emergency declaration. This just shows the types of assistance that were opened up by FEMA for those particular disasters. Loss estimation approaches, I talked about that just briefly now, but for flood, hurricane, wind, and earthquake, we're able to use a FEMA loss estimation modeling software called HAZUS, stands for Hazards US, and it has it's basically FEMA state-of-the-art modeling for different scenarios for those particular disasters. So we were able to use that for loss estimation on the four hazards you see listed there. And then for the other hazards, we used either the National Climate or Center for Environmental Information, NFIP losses, the FEMA public assistance reimbursements, and different ways of taking historical data and using it to project into the future. Just a run through of a couple of the results. The first one for severe winter weather. This is all from the NCEI database. You can see there's a lot of gaps in that analysis in the data. So the analysis is kind of limited to what the data tells us, but it looks at deaths, injuries, property and crop losses, and then total damages and the different types of events. And it breaks it down into the different winter weather events that you see in this column on the left. So overall in that database, they show only $615,000 worth of damages from winter storms. But these, again, are why I said before, I emphasize the word reported, are reported physical damages to tangible things. It doesn't consider snow removal budgets, car accidents, things of that nature. So it's just one piece of the analysis. Taking that piece of the analysis, and this is only since 1996, we look at annualizing the number of events. So these are the percent chances of an annualized or every year of one of these types of events happening across the county, the total damages and the annualized damages. So only based on physical reported damages, it's about $25,000 a year based on this database. I don't love these charts because they leave an awful lot out that we address in the narrative in the plan. Severe weather, again, based on best available data, the period of history is much longer for severe weather events. And what that means is wind, hailstorm, lightning, and thunderstorms. You can see total damages reported in that period. And these numbers are all adjusted to today's dollars, 6.8 million. Annualized damages down the jurisdictions, 252,000 a year across the county, all jurisdictions, which is not insignificant. But again, these are based on reported damages. Flooding, we look at the traditional FEMA mapped floodplains, what's in them, how deep the water is. HAZUS does modeling based on the depth of flooding and how much water is anticipated to get into the building stock and the type of damages that might cause. We do, again, just by comparison's sake, we look at the NCEI data and look at the HAZUS total loss estimations. And this goes to show some of the limitations in the NCEI data, whereas that gives you the number of annualized flooding events. And it says that the annualized damages based on this historical data are approximately $1.5 million annually. And the HAZUS loss estimation tool that FEMA has that models actual scenarios comes up with a significantly higher number. And the primary reason that is because it assumes that it's having the modeled event across the entire county and all the jurisdictions. And so those HAZUS loss numbers are traditionally very high, but they're a good means of comparing jurisdiction to jurisdiction or county to county. But they're high because they assume that every place in Frederick County is having the same exact exact flood recurrence frequency in the calculation, and in reality, it doesn't typically work that way. You may, in the city of Frederick, have a 100-year event, but that same event might be a 50-year event in Emmitsburg. So this is just a different depiction of the annualized flood losses by census block. No surprise, there's higher losses in the more urbanized areas just because there's more there to be damaged. And then this pluvial modeling that we talked about, the new thing that we did this time. Again, pluvial is surface water flooding, as you see on the left, water that overwhelms the drainage system. It includes riverine out of the bank flooding as well, but it's more focused on where the water goes in a more high intensity event. So we were, with the budget we had, we were able to do a high level pluvial flood modeling exercise. It's a 2-dimensional model. If you were to do it as a separate project with a much larger budget, you would be able to incorporate some things like all the culverts, all the bridges, openings, things to impact the drainage across the county. This is done at a higher level, but it gave us some results that we were able to field verify and check against some other models that we've done to a higher level of detail, and it yielded pretty good results. So I won't go through all the technical mumbo jumbo. I'll just say that it was a 2D rain on grid model. It looked at a variety of different return frequencies. The 100-year event, the 25, I think 10, 25, and 50 as well, maybe a few more than that. And we compared some results. So this particular picture shows the 100-year 24-hour event with a zoom in to the little Tuscarora Creek area for that 100-year 24-hour rainfall event. The next slide shows the FEMA mapping on the left and the results of our model on the right, and you can see the level of increased granularity that you get with the modeling of these different rainfall events. So we took that, the map that you see on the right, and did some analysis of what's at risk in these obviously increased areas of flooding, and that analysis will be included in the plan. So the limitations, again, this is mostly technical stuff, but the limitations were just not being able to plug in every single structure, bridge, culvert, things like that. It was a higher level model. We are developing a mitigation strategy in the plan to continuously improve the model, because it is now we have a very good baseline and all the modeling is set up. So as you gather the larger details, you can plug them into the model and increase its accuracy at a more granular level. So that was the pluvial modeling, which was a significant improvement. Onto the annexes for, I mentioned a few times colleges. So as Frederick Community College, Mount St. Mary's University, and Hood College are participants in the plan. So each of them will have an annex that addresses things specific to their campuses. They'll have an independent risk assessment section that will utilize all the countywide data, treat them as part of the community in which they reside, but it will also have hazards that are more unique to college campuses, everything from automobile accidents to active shooting to whatever hazards they selected as being more relevant and critical to a college campus. And those are well underway, and we're having series of meetings with them. The next series will be to present the risk assessment results and solicit mitigation strategies. So stay tuned for more on that in the draft. And then lastly, all of the risk assessment and loss estimation results, as I said at the beginning, are intended to drive the development of the mitigation goals, objectives, and strategies. And again, the purpose is reducing losses, not only physical losses, but societal, economic, and environmental losses. So again, the risk assessment informs the mitigation strategies. It's a series of goals. They don't change a whole lot. The simple overarching goal is to reduce damages and expenditures and protect people. But what we've done this time is we've taken the 2016 goals and talking through it with the committee and the local planning teams, we've kind of categorized them into the types of actions on the right. So we're looking at physical projects, capabilities, the public piece, and then the forward-looking policy and planning piece. So we'll probably have 4 to 5 goals instead of all the ones on the left, and more objectives that specifically address those general areas, all kind of encapsulated in the changing climate issues. Next steps, the survey closed, as I mentioned. If people could just pop your name and email into the chat, we're happy to open it up to you if you haven't had a chance to do it. The full committee will review the goals and objectives, or did review the goals and objectives in October. The mitigation strategy meetings are going to be happening in November for all the participating jurisdictions. And then we'll have a draft of the plan sometime, hopefully around the second week of December. We will post it, we will reach out, we will advertise it to try to get input into that plan. And then there'll be a second meeting like this where we'll actually present the findings with more emphasis on the mitigation strategies. So that's where we're at. If I could ask everyone who's participating just to pop your name and affiliation into the chat, particularly if you're not a member of the committee or you're new to this or you're a member of the public, so that we can capture that for the documentation. If you'd like to receive further information or a link to the draft when it's posted, please pop that email in there so that we can reach out to you specifically. And at this point, I'd be happy to take any questions. That was a lot of information to absorb in 43 minutes. There's a lot more of it that I could have went on about, so I'm happy to stop talking and listen and try to answer your questions. And I see I have one from John.
Hi there, Scott. Very nice to meet you. I have a couple of questions. Would you like them all at once or separately?
Let's take them one at a time.
Okay, great. And I apologize, I was a few minutes late due to a connection error, so you might have covered the first one. You mentioned that the draft plan is developed. It is not finalized, obviously, still in the draft state. When was the draft date completed?
There's not a full draft currently. The hazard ID risk assessment, capability assessment, and to date planning process description are done in draft. The mitigation strategies we'll be working on in November, and there will be a complete draft in early to mid-December that will be available. We're happy to make any pieces of the risk assessment and things available for review ahead of time if you're interested.
Well, I asked as a representative of the climate emergency working group that participated all last year. We just published our report. I know you said you incorporated it. I wanted to know if there was enough time for you to review it and incorporate it into the plan, if you found anything useful. So if it is still in that early stage of development, it sounds like you would have had time.
I know that we've incorporated some of the risk assessment related components to it. We'll probably incorporate it more as we move forward with the mitigation and adaptation strategy development. So yeah, that's frequently the case with these plans. There's things going on at the same time that kind of overlap with each other, and it's hard to, you can't slow down one project to speed up another one. So we will work our best with you to make sure we do that. There's still time. Not a lot of time, but there's still time.
Of course. Okay. Well, that was a concern, and thank you for including it and mentioning it. And of course, there is a follow-on committee that will be happy to address any questions and anything you need for that.
Yeah.
My second question is that you mentioned that part of the update was based on countywide feedback. And I know you talked about the survey. Did you target that survey to specific stakeholder groups? And how did you choose those stakeholder groups for the survey?
We did. I think that that Jack and Dennis could probably speak to that better than I can. I wasn't directly involved in it. I don't have our lead planner is on vacation, and her and Dennis worked on that together. So I'm gonna punt
Okay.
that.
I think I can address that.
Yeah.
We targeted it, part of the survey, towards the 3 colleges specifically for their responses, but we targeted the whole community, and we reached out to try and reach as much of the community as possible. And we used some of our contacts with church groups, contacts with partners in emergency management that we work with, to further spread that survey out and to get as much input from the public as possible. We put out press releases to the public, and basically we did an outreach as much as we could to get as much input from the community as possible, as well as the business community. We asked them to distribute it.
Yeah,
for us.
absolutely. That's a huge component, the business community. The reason I specifically asked this question is that it was a concern brought up during our time in the last year, that we specifically look at the lower income populations, the ALICE populations, the ones who are not going to be able at the college level, in the business community, to make sure that their inputs and needs were addressed as part of an equity situation. And I know you mentioned equity was a concern later on in the presentation. I just wanted to see if that was part of the stakeholder groups that you considered and how you reached out to them.
Yes, that was one of the groups we considered, and that was one of the reasons we reached out through our community service organizations and through our church groups that we work with on a regular basis. We have our LEPC that we used, and we also have our VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, who also are active working with vulnerable communities all the time. So we've asked those organizations to distribute our survey as well.
I'd also add that our municipalities are key players. So the mayors and the administrative officers for the municipalities in Frederick are also partners in sharing this information to their key stakeholders, since they know their individual municipalities and the needs within those municipalities far better. So we're seeking their input.
Yes, and Jack brings up a point that I almost missed. Jade distributed those surveys to the municipalities to distribute through their distribution systems that they use to their public. So that was just another level of reaching out to the community through each municipality's outreach to their community.
And I'll add that the results, or the findings of the survey, are being compiled currently this week. They might even be available tomorrow. But I will say that I don't know if we perfectly hit every single group that we might, but in terms of response, it's been about the best that I've been doing these plans for 20 years, and the pure turnout of response was really, really impressive to me. I was very surprised. So hopefully we captured a broad cross section of all the different pieces of the community.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. Two more questions real quick, and I'm sorry, I hope I'm not monopolizing time. Somebody let me know if we need to switch out.
We love questions.
The weather events that you illustrated in the presentation did not include heat-related events, I noticed, because they're not part of the HAZUS database. Were heat-related events included, even though they're not, that data wasn't available through FEMA?
Yeah, I did a quick summary of the three top hazards, but on that one slide where I showed all of the events, we did address heat. We addressed it in the context of drought and in extreme weather. We'll go back and make sure we hit it hard enough.
Yeah, because I mean, you're talking about winter-related events versus heat-related events,
Right.
and aggregate, your heat-related events in the last 10 years are much more impactful than your winter storm events.
Right, and it dovetails well with the social vulnerability component as well, because those are the communities that are
Drinking water vulnerability, stormwater, it all ties together there. And again, a year of doing this and 20 years in the environmental business,
Yeah.
aggregate sometimes can get overlooked, and I'm glad that you guys are looking at that.
Yeah, I'll double check and make sure that it's addressed. I can go back to that slide after we get through the questions if we need to, but yeah, the numbers and stats that I touched on were just like a dabbling of the risk assessment is probably 200 pages long and includes a lot of other hazards. I just was expecting the audience to be more general public, so I was trying to be brief and give a high level overview. But yes, heat is in there, and we'll double check and make sure that it's properly addressed.
I apologize. I hope I'm not drilling too deep there.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
No,
not.
John, that's the purpose of having these meetings.
Yeah.
Is sure we get that input and make sure that we're dealing with everything that concerns this community, because it's the community's hazard mitigation plan. It's not the county governments. It's not the it's everybody's, municipalities, county government, the citizens. And that's why it's very important to get this input. So we really appreciate your question, John.
Great.
Yeah.
I got one more, and then I can let somebody else go. And this one should be pretty done pretty quickly. The pluvial model you mentioned that you said could be updated after the plan is done, could be turned over to the county. Does the county have the ability, the software, the technical capability to model that themselves, or would that have to be contracted out again? And does that modeling, could that be updated to include possible future impacts, climate change, growth and development in the, in terms of construction inside the county with projected population increases? And does it also include updates from the surrounding counties where the water bodies feed into?
Yeah, so with any type of modeling of flooding, you could keep going and going and going and going.
Right.
We could make this into a $2 million modeling exercise really, really easily. So the idea with this was to build a baseline that we could do with the budget that we had, and to test it against other known conditions, to get input over the story map, things like that, to make sure it seems to be calibrating well. It does preliminarily. To answer the question about whether the county has the capability in-house, I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that a little bit.
Sure.
Mr. Scherer's asking great questions. Part of how we came to, where we are asking Dewberry to participate in this pluvial modeling that really is leading edge based on the realities that we're seeing in front of us. 2018 in Frederick County in May, was a significant flood event. And the impacts of it weren't strictly constrained to typical drainages. It really was water moving across the ground, irrespective of where drainages stormwater systems existed because they were overwhelmed. So we began a conversation after that with Dewberry based on some work that was happening with NASA and other organizations worldwide about using satellite modeling to look at precipitation and how it affected less developed areas. And the question that arose was, can we do that at a high level for Frederick County, looking at what happens when our stormwater systems are overwhelmed by the rain rates that we've seen more recently, getting up in that 2-3 inch an hour, similar to what happened to Ellicott City twice in 2015 and in 2018. So this was a first effort at, let's look at the county at a high level and see if we detect any locations that we have greater concern about and where the cost benefit ratio of digging deeper and doing a more detailed model might make sense. I think the county does have some basic capabilities, but we certainly recognize the power of Dewberry and other similar organizations to provide a lot deeper experience and a lot more horsepower to help us look at these challenges and try to put strategies in place to do something about it.
Yeah, and I'll just add, it's always a partnership too. So a lot of it is just the collection of very detailed information over a very large geographic area. So even if the county didn't have the modeling expertise to do everything, there's ways to form a partnership where some of that kind of legwork that would cost you a fortune to hire somebody to do might be done at the county level. So
okay, that's fantastic. Those are my questions. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to Dennis's point, I'll just reiterate, there's a lot of times we have these meetings and we hear crickets. So we really do actually appreciate and enjoy comments and questions.
Well, I can talk to you another 2 hours about the stormwater modeling. So I'll let somebody else talk now.
Yeah, if you want to set up a call with the folks who actually did the modeling, I'd be happy to do that, and we can talk. They can give you a lot more articulate answers than I can.
That's fine. Thank you so much.
So Scott, I have a question. This is John Breeding from the town of Mount Airy.
Sure.
So looking back to your one chart where I see there's, I don't know, it was maybe 8 or 10 slides ago related to the money that was either spent or not spent. I noticed that Mount Airy had a 000 number and Burkittsville had like $4.62 or something like that. So I'm just trying to figure out what that was representing again. And I wonder, because Mount Airy is of course divided by a county line, right? So half of our town is in Frederick and half of it's in Carroll County.
Yeah.
If those numbers are respective to the town of Mount Airy just on the Frederick County side. And I just wonder if those numbers are accurate and wondered what they were representing.
Yeah, what that does, and that's why I really dislike presenting NCEI data at meetings like this, because it's so misleading. NCEI primarily reports at the county-wide level, and if they occasionally they have dollars for a specific municipality, city or town, and but in most cases they don't. Other cases, if they have a dollar amount for Frederick County, they may divide it using a formula like population or geographic area and distribute it across the municipalities. So all the zeros mean for Mount Airy is that nothing was reported specifically for Mount Airy in the database.
Okay.
So it is in the plan where we present this is all explained. But yeah, just looking at the numbers in this chart, like the 1.46 million that you see in the unincorporated county, all of that really is distributed across all these zeros. We just don't know. It's not in the database.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's all right. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, it's a legitimate question. It's one of the weaknesses of the data in that database, and that's why I emphasize reported damages. We've even seen cases where like a major hurricane that impacts 5 counties, and all they know is like Maryland got $1 billion worth of damage, and they just take the billion and divide it across the 4 counties or however many counties were involved. So
Affected, sure.
it's
Okay. That
it's
answers
a
my question.
spot check at best.
And again, if you can forward the survey to me, I did put my email address in the chat box.
Yep, I saw that. Appreciate it.
Take
Will
that.
do. Yep,
Take that Monday morning.
we'll do that. And if this has been delegated to you and you want to have a separate conversation to get up to speed on other things, we're happy to do that offline too.
Yep, no worries. Thank you for your time.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody. Oh, I have one more from John. Go ahead. Or is that that's a hand up from the last time?
Yeah, that's from last time. Sorry.
Sorry. I confess I still don't know how to turn the hands up off either. So. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for taking an hour out of your evening. Appreciate it. And any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. If you don't have our contact information, you can easily get it from Jack or Dennis. And we look forward to finishing things up in the next month or two.
I'd like to take the moment and thank Scott and Jade and the whole Dewberry team, as well as the team, Dennis, Tony, and the local mitigation team. Several members are here on the call. But for the folks who maybe will come back and click on the link and watch this recording, we're really focused on trying to learn, as County Executive Gardner said, about our history, our rich history, and to try to build a brighter, stronger, more prosperous future that takes care of our hazards as they change. We want to engage early, try to reduce our risk, try to reduce our negative impacts. And so if we can get people to give us good feedback, we appreciate the questions tonight because they help make our plan stronger. This plan is updated, as Scott said, once every 5 years, but it's a living plan. We really only do the paper part of it once every 5 years, but we're constantly looking at the strategies and constantly looking at the challenges. So the work done by the county council, the work done by the municipalities or our adjacent counties is still very relevant and helps drive us forward. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for what you've done so far, and it isn't over yet. We need to keep working on this, get it through to adoption, and keep working on implementing the strategies. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a good group to work with so far. We're looking forward to this. I really honestly believe that this is going to be a plan that's going to be a model for other counties in Maryland and maybe further beyond. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the evening.
Lovely talking to you. Thank you all.
Thank you.